7.23 changed things up in Dota 2 in a big way, and the new map changes of course call for a new ward placement guide. Now, I've covered warding before, and in that video I went through most of the basics such as why you should ward, how to practice it, and some other tips that I'm not going to be covering here. Now, if you haven't watched that one and if you're a beginner, I recommend you check that one out first, so I'll put a link in the description, or you can click straight to the video through the cards up in the top right. In this video though, I'll briefly go through counter warding, some of the changes in the 7.23 map, and then I'll start going through the ward locations and placements that you can use in your games. These will be broken up into cliff wards, mid wards, safe lane wards, offlane wards, jungle wards, ROSHAN and river wards, and finally base wards. I've been playing a heap of support recently, so this is pretty fresh in my mind, and I wanted to share this with you all so you can step up your game and learn something new. Awesome guys, now don't forget to give us a like if this video helps you out, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. Truly, this really helps me out and enables me to build and sustain making videos for the channel, so I'd love if you could help me out by doing that. Alright, one of the things I think is good practice to do is counter warding before you place down an observer ward. If you place a ward down under enemy vision, they are obviously going to see where you've placed it, and deward it as soon as they can, so it's quite important that you try to do this. I'd say that early game it is not as critical as supports are generally poor and don't want to spend too much money on sentries so early, but even so, be careful to try and place them without the enemy seeing you. The best way to do this is by placing the ward on the ground in between two or more potential warding spots. Cliff spots can be a little bit harder if you don't have flying vision, a blink, or a spell which can give you brief vision of the high ground, and in that case you might have to put the sentry ward up there on the cliff, but overall this will cost you a little bit extra as you'll need to use more sentries to stop you from getting scouted out. That being said, it's still worth doing if it means you can get your vision up without being dewarded. Another thing that changed in the 7.23 patch is the fact that observer wards are now free. I love this change as I've been playing a lot of support recently and I'm always poor. This also means if you're a mid hero at 6 minutes and your mid ward has run out, you don't need to yell at your support anymore. You can actually buy it yourself and it won't cost you anything. Just buy it, get your courier to deliver it to you and drop it wherever you want without waiting for your support. Alright, now let me guide you through the cliff warding spots. I'll be showing some maps of the most popular ward locations for each section, so feel free to pause the video when those come up. I was thinking I could make some nice little infographics as well if you think that might help. But yeah, if you want that, just drop me a comment below. Alright, so the cliff locations are pretty obvious warding spots and can easily be counter warded since they are the strongest places to ward. But if you can manage to ward one of these and hold the area, it can be extremely valuable to you and your teammates. One of the main differences between the old map and the new map is actually an increase to the number of cliffs. In the old map, there used to only be 6 cliff warding spots, but now we have 11 in total, not including the Tinker ward spots. The main Radiant and Dire jungles each have 3 cliff spots. The Radiant triangle has 2 cliffs, while the Dire triangle, interestingly, has 1 more at 3 cliffs. Of course, there are also the Tinker ward spots, and there isn't much difference in these ones from the old map. They are still in the same locations with 1 on each edge of the map, allowing you to spy pesky Tinkers or other split push heroes who may be trying to hide in these tree locations after pushing the lane. Keep in mind that if your enemy is counter warding often, and they should be, then it's time to stop placing these wards on the cliffs and start placing them in some more obscure locations. Next up we've got the mid wards. These ones are pretty straightforward as there isn't really a whole lot of locations to place them, at least in the early game. As a mid player, usually you want to be able to see the enemy mid hero, the rune spawn, and of course avoid incoming ganks from all directions. There were some reasonable changes around the mid lane map which makes warding a little bit harder to see all of these things, especially on the Dire side where these new trees are located. If you want, you can cut these trees down, but I think this might make it a little bit more obvious where you've placed your ward, so just keep this in mind. Some of the best spots are to the left or the right of the lane, in order to see the rune as it spawns and also scout out enemy ganks. Ideally, you want to place this on the enemy high ground if you can, so you have vision of what they're doing. If you're not too worried about the rune spawn locations, you can place it a little bit closer to the middle of the lane, as this will give you better vision of the enemy mid laner. If you're a roaming hero, you might like to throw one down behind the enemy tier 1 tower so you can scout out the mid lane's courier and kill it off early. As the game progresses, mid lane wards become very useful and probably a little bit underrated, as they typically can be placed anywhere throughout the lane to scout out enemy movements. Anytime the enemy tries to cross mid to go to top or bottom lane, you'll have a pretty good idea of where they're going, and that's why, aside from cliff wards, I think mid wards are the strongest in the game. Alright, now if you're the offlaner, you're probably thinking of a few different ways you can use your wards depending on how strong you are compared to the opposing team's safe lane. I like being sneaky beaky like and often place my ward up into the lane or up on the cliff here to scan out the enemy's couriers so I can snipe them off as they come through. You could also place them over here, a little closer to the tower so you can be a bit more aggressive on the enemy and see if anyone is teleporting in or when the enemy might be creep pulling. If you feel unsafe, there are a few places you could use your ward to protect yourself from incoming ganks. Most of the time, these ganks will come from the enemy jungle, so obviously placing these somewhere here is the way to go. Of course, creep pulling is a great tactic to use in the safe lane, so if the enemy is doing this often, you might want to use your ward to block the easy camp. Any good support will deward this one fairly quickly though, so just try to place your ward in a spot as hard as possible to deward. I find safe lane wards can be used in similar locations as offlane wards, but with a little bit of a different purpose in most cases. Most of the time, these are just used to scout out your enemies so you know where they are and what they're doing, so you can protect your carry from being ganked. Some of the best spots are in the lane towards the enemy's offlane tier 1 tower, although I find positioning it off to the side somewhere is best if you can do it without being spotted, as this one can get dewarded quite easily. I also like to put them around the jungle camps to spot if the enemy is coming over when I'm pulling, or if they're trying to pull themselves. In recent times though, I've also found that the enemies like to pull the hard camp over to their creeps, which is really not that hard to do, and I find if they're doing this quite a lot, I prefer to actually block this camp with my ward. Usually though, you only need to do this once in the first 6 minutes as it is unlikely it will be dewarded, but occasionally you might need to place this one in a sneaky spot as well if the enemy is dewarding you. Cool, alright, jungle wards are great and can of course be used both offensively and defensively. Now there's many locations to place these wards, so have a look at the map here to find some of the most popular ones. Of course, being popular, these are often dewarded, so try to find some sneaky spots that you can place them if the enemy is all over their dewards. I want to mention that too often I see teams ward up an area of the jungle and then switch over to the other side of the map and instantly have all the wards they just placed dewarded. Now of course, being a scrubby ancient, this happens in my games all of the time as well, but something that I've been trying to do is have my teammates defend the area and take fights in areas that we have great vision in. Vision gives you such an advantage, especially if you have better vision than the enemy, so make the most of it and use it as much as you can when you have good vision. Now overall, I like the changes that have been made to the Rosh pit location, but it has made it a little bit more awkward to ward. There are really only 3 or maybe 4 spots that seem to work, but only the river locations give decent vision around it. The other locations on the dire or radiant high ground are fairly good, but you can't see the potential lurkers on the other side of the pit or the supports in the back line. Overall, I find Roshan is one of the hardest places to ward without being dewarded, as the locations here are fairly limited and fairly obvious. Just looking at it, you could place them down near the crossing from either side to the pit, but it makes it a little bit hard to see if they actually go in or not. But I don't know, maybe it could be of some use. Alright, so that pretty much covers Roshan off, but there's also the rest of the river. Now, I think the river ward locations are fairly obvious, as pretty much any location along the riverbanks can be useful, especially for scouting out enemy movements as they make their way through the river or nearby jungle on their way to a gank. Some of the spots are better though, as they will give you partial vision in the jungle as well as the river. Have a look at the map here, and of course feel free to pause if you want more time, but just have a look at these ward locations along the river, as they're some of the best that you can use. Alright, now base wards are interesting ones, as they're only usually used much later in the game, and really hardly last a minute in most cases as they quickly get dewarded. That being said, a sneaky early base ward can be really great to spot enemy players' movements, as well as courier movements, which can give away the enemy's positions as well. Now, if you can, try placing a nice deep ward behind enemy lines, such as this one, as it's much more likely to withstand the test of time and not be dewarded, but still give you amazing vision of the enemy team. Now, I'll admit, these ones are pretty hard to place, and it's unlikely you'll be able to place them without a smoke, and someone who can teleport like a Nature's Prophet or an IO maybe. Or maybe you've got someone who can blink in and out without being seen. That might work as well. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thank you for watching this video, and hopefully you've gotten something out of it. Make sure you drop me a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more videos to support the channel. You guys are all champions and I really hope this helped you learn and get better in Dota. Once again, I'm Defied and happy gaming.